I'm Ileana, I'm 28, I'm a woman, and 5 years ago my own father called me a disgrace to our family in front of everyone we knew. He didn't just say it, he declared it, his voice booming with the kind of authority that had governed my entire life. His judgment was the final, crushing blow that severed a bond I had spent my whole childhood trying to earn. So I vanished. I walked away from his world of concrete, steel, and suffocating expectations. And now, I'm about to walk back in, not as the daughter he cast out, but as the one person on earth who holds the fate of his entire legacy in her hands. My father, Richard Thompson, is a man built from the same materials his company uses. He is hard, unyielding, and believes that the only things of value in this world are those you can touch, measure, and put a price on. His company, Thompson and Son Construction, was his father's before him, and the name itself was a daily reminder of the hierarchy in our family. It was never meant to be Thompson and daughter. My older brother, Mark, was the and son. He was the heir, the golden child, the one who walked the pre-paved road his father had laid for him. Mark was 4 years older, and from the moment he could hold a toy hammer, he was being groomed. He was a perfect echo of my father, pragmatic, business-minded, and utterly dismissive of anything that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. My mother, Helen, was the gentle mortar holding our crumbling family structure together. She loved me, I knew she did, but her love was a quiet, passive thing, always secondary to her primary role as Richard's placid supporter. She was a professional peacekeeper in a war where I was the sole casualty. The conflict wasn't a single event, it was the climate of my childhood. I can remember countless instances where my world was deemed lesser than Mark's. When I was 10, I won first place in a citywide youth art competition. My piece was a detailed charcoal drawing of the old clock tower downtown. I'd spent weeks on it, capturing every crack in the stone, every shadow the afternoon sun cast. I came home clutching a blue ribbon and a small trophy, my heart thrumming with a pride so pure it felt like it might lift me off the ground. I found my father in his study, going over blueprints. I held up the trophy. "Dad, look, I won." He glanced up, his eyes barely registering the object in my hand. "That's nice, Ellie," he said, his focus already returning to the papers. "Don't get charcoal on the rug." A few hours later, Mark came home from his soccer game. His team had lost, but he'd scored a goal. My father called us all into the living room. He put his hand on Mark's shoulder, his face beaming with a pride that was visceral, a force I could feel but never touch. "Did you hear?" he announced to my mother and me. "Mark here scored a phenomenal goal, a real display of power and strategy. That's the Thompson spirit." We all went out for ice cream to celebrate Mark's goal in a lost game, while my first place trophy sat alone on my nightstand, gathering dust. The message was clear. His world was real, and mine was a nice little hobby. That pattern repeated itself endlessly. When it came time for college, the chasm between my path and my brother's became impossible to ignore. Mark had gone to a prestigious business school, every penny of his tuition paid for without a moment's hesitation. It was an investment in the family's future, my father had called it. When I, a straight-A student, announced that I wanted to attend one of the country's top art and design colleges, the reaction was starkly different. We were in the dining room. The heavy mahogany table felt like a courtroom bench. "Art school?" Richard had scoffed, setting down his fork with a sharp clink. "Ileana, be serious. What is that going to get you? A lifetime of debt and a job serving coffee." "It's a 4-year degree, Dad," I argued, my voice trembling slightly. "It's a real career. Graphic design, animation, digital media, these are huge industries." "Those are not our industries," he stated, as if that settled it. "Mark is building a future. He's learning to manage assets, to lead men, to create tangible things. You want to doodle. I will not waste a fortune on a degree in doodling." My mother wrung her hands. "Richard, perhaps we could look at their business programs," she began, trying to find a compromise. "No," he cut her off. "If she wants to go, she can figure it out herself. Thompson and Son does not invest in fantasies." I ended up going to a state university, taking on loans and working 2 jobs to pay for a program that was a pale shadow of my dream. I watched Mark graduate and step into a vice president role at the company, his future secure and celebrated. I, on the other hand, was seen as a cautionary tale. The breaking point, the night it all shattered for good, was 5 years ago. The house was filled with people for Mark's official remotion party. It was less of a party and more of a coronation. Business partners, city officials, and distant relatives all gathered to pay respects to the Thompson legacy and its future king. I stood in the corner of the grand living room, feeling like a ghost. I was working part-time as a freelance graphic designer for a small local paper, barely making rent. In my father's eyes, this was the pathetic outcome he had predicted. He'd had a few glasses of expensive scotch and was holding court near the fireplace. Someone, a well-meaning but clueless cousin, asked me what I was up to. I mumbled something about my design work. My father overheard. He turned, and a cruel smile spread across his face. "Did you hear that?" he said, his voice loud enough to silence the nearby conversations. "Ileana is a designer. She draws cartoons for the classifieds." Laughter rippled through the group. My face burned with shame. "Dad, please don't," I whispered, my eyes pleading. But he was on a roll, fueled by alcohol and a lifetime of disappointment in me. "You know, my father built this company with his bare hands. I expanded it into the most respected firm in the state. My son," he said, clapping a hand on Mark's back, "is going to take it into the next generation. We build things. We build the city. We create legacies." He then turned his gaze fully on me, and his eyes were cold and hard as granite. "And you? What do you do? You hide behind a computer screen and make little pictures. You had every opportunity to be part of this, to have a respectable life, but you chose this pathetic fantasy." The room was silent now. Everyone was watching. My mother looked horrified but paralyzed. Mark just stared at his shoes, a smirk playing on his lips. "I asked for your support once," I said, my voice shaking with a rage that was finally boiling over. "I asked you to believe in me." "Believe in you?" he boomed. "Believe in what? There's nothing there. You are a disappointment, Ileana. You've done nothing with the name I gave you. You are a disgrace to this family." Disgrace. The word hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It echoed in the sudden, deafening silence. I looked at his face, contorted with a kind of righteous fury, and I saw the truth. He would never see me. He would never value me. I was, and always would be, a failed version of his son. Something inside me snapped. The years of quiet hurt, of swallowing my pride, of trying to be small enough not to be a target, it all evaporated. In its place was a cold, clear certainty. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just looked him in the eye, and for the first time, he wasn't a giant. He was just a small, angry man. I turned without another word, walked through the crowd of stunned faces, out the front door, and into the cool night air. I got in my beat-up car and drove away. I didn't just leave the party. I left my entire life behind. That night, Ileana Thompson, the disgrace, ceased to exist. The first few weeks after I left were a blur of motion and raw emotion. I drove for 2 days straight, fueled by cheap coffee and a burning sense of finality. I ended up in a sprawling, anonymous city hundreds of miles away, a place where the name Thompson meant nothing. The first night, I slept in my car in a Walmart parking lot, the word disgrace still ringing in my ears like a relentless tinnitus. For a moment, curled up in the passenger seat with a scratchy blanket, a wave of pure terror washed over me. I was utterly alone. I had no safety net, no savings to speak of, and a broken heart that felt like a physical weight in my chest. But then, as the sun rose, casting a pale, indifferent light over the rows of cars, another feeling began to seep in: freedom. It was a terrifying, exhilarating kind of freedom. There were no more expectations to fail, no more disapproving glances to dodge, no more forced smiles at family dinners. The narrative of my life was, for the first time, a blank page. I sold my car for a few $1,000s, enough for a deposit on a tiny, shoebox apartment in a rundown neighborhood and a month's rent. The place had peeling paint, a window that looked out onto a brick wall, and a radiator that clanged like a blacksmith's anvil. It was the most beautiful place I had ever lived. It was mine. To survive, I took a job as a barista at a 24-hour diner. The work was grueling. I spent my days on my feet, slinging coffee, wiping down sticky tables, and smiling at strangers until my face ached. I came home each night smelling of grease and burnt coffee, my body exhausted, but my mind was clear. The physical labor was a balm. It left no room for the circular, self-defeating thoughts that had plagued me for years. It was in that tiny apartment, during the quiet hours after my shifts, that my new life began. I bought a cheap second-hand drawing tablet and a refurbished laptop. With the city humming outside my window, I started to draw again. But this W wasn't for a client or a class. This was for me. I poured all the pain, the anger, the loneliness, and the slivers of hope into my work. I decided to create a world. A world where value wasn't measured in concrete and steel, but in creativity, courage, and ingenuity. I began to build the universe of Chronos Eterna, a sweeping science fantasy epic. My protagonist was a young woman named Anya, an outcast from a rigidly structured, industrial society who discovers she has a unique ability to manipulate the flow of time through art and ancient technology. She was everything I wanted to be: brave, powerful, and the master of her own destiny. To keep myself anonymous and safe from any possible outreach from my family, I chose a pseudonym, Lyra. It was the name of a constellation, a collection of distant stars forming a beautiful picture. It felt right. As Lyra, I started posting panels of Chronos Eterna on a popular webcomic forum. I expected nothing. It was an outlet, a message in a bottle thrown into the vast ocean of the internet. For the first few months, my work got only a handful of views, a few polite comments, cool art style, interesting concept. But I didn't care. I was creating. I was building Anya's world, panel by painful, meticulous panel. I was telling my story through her. Her struggles against the monolithic forge, the ruling body of her society, were my struggles. Her small victories were my own. Then, one day, something shifted. I posted a sequence where Anya, having been rejected and cast out, uses her unique talent to reactivate a long-dormant, beautiful piece of ancient architecture that her society had deemed useless. The post included a short artist's note. Sometimes, the things society discards are the very keys to its salvation. The next morning, I woke up to my laptop buzzing. My post had been shared by a major influencer in the sci-fi community. From there, it exploded. My follower count, which had been in the low hundreds, was suddenly in the tens of thousands. The comment section was a flood of enthusiasm. "This is breathtaking. I've never seen world building this deep in a webcomic. Anya is my new hero. Team Anya. Lyra, whoever you are, you're a genius." Tears streamed down my face as I read the messages. They weren't just complimenting my art, they were seeing the soul I had poured into it. They saw the value in the very thing my father had called a pathetic fantasy. For the first time, I felt seen not as Richard Thompson's disappointing daughter, but as Lyra, the creator of worlds. The newfound attention was a fire under me. I quit my job at the diner and dedicated every waking moment to Chronos Eterna. I established a posting schedule and never missed a deadline. My audience grew exponentially. A fan community sprouted, creating wikis to track my lore, debating theories, and making fan art of my characters. I started a small crowdfunding page to support my work, and it met its goal in less than an hour. About 6 months into my new life as Lyra, I received an email that made my heart stop. It was from a senior editor at a major graphic novel publisher, one of the biggest in the country. He had been following my webcomic and wanted to offer me a publishing deal for a full-length, print trilogy of Chronos Eterna. He called my work a once-in-a-generation blend of narrative depth and stunning visual artistry. I sat in my tiny apartment, the email glowing on my screen, and I laughed. It was a hysterical, unhinged laugh of pure, unadulterated joy. It was the sound of a ghost coming back to life. I was no longer Ileana Thompson, the disgraced daughter from a family of builders. I was Lyra, and I was about to build an empire of my own. the publishing deal changed everything. The advance they offered was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was enough to move out of my shoebox apartment and into a bright, modern loft in the city's arts district. The first piece of furniture I bought was a massive, professional-grade drafting table. Setting it up in the center of my new, sun-drenched studio felt like a sacred ritual. This was my altar. This was my throne. Signing the contract was a delicate process. My anonymity was non-negotiable. I explained to the publisher that for personal reasons, the identity of Lyra had to remain a closely guarded secret. In an industry that was increasingly personality-driven, it was an unusual request, but the strength of my work gave me leverage. They agreed. We set up a corporation, Lyra Media, to be the legal entity that would receive payments and handle business. My real name appeared only on the confidential legal documents, locked away in a lawyer's file cabinet. The first volume of Chronos Eterna was released a year later. The marketing campaign was built entirely around the mystery of Lyra. It worked better than any of us could have imagined. The book debuted at #1 on the bestseller list N.D. stayed there for weeks. Critics lauded it, it won industry awards, but more importantly, it connected with people on a massive scale. My life transformed into a strange duality. By day, I was Ileana, a quiet woman who frequented local coffee shops, took long walks in the park, and enjoyed her solitude. But online, I was Lyra, a creative titan. My email was flooded with interview requests, which I always declined, fan mail that spoke of how Anya's story had given people hope, and, increasingly, business proposals. The success was intoxicating, but it was also overwhelming. I was an artist, not a CEO. I knew how to draw a cityscape, not how to navigate a merchandising contract. That's when I met Ben Carter. Ben was a tech entrepreneur who had sold his first software company before he was 25. He was also one of Lyra's earliest and most vocal fans. He reached out to me not through my publisher, but through a direct message on the old webcomic forum, a place I still checked out of nostalgia. His message wasn't like the others. He didn't just praise the art, he understood the philosophy behind it. He wrote, "The core theme of Chronos Eterna isn't just about saving the world. It's about a fundamental clash of ideologies, the rigid, industrial past versus a flexible, creative, human-centric future. You're not just writing a story, you're designing a better model for society." He saw it, he truly saw it. We started an anonymous email correspondence. He was brilliant, funny, and deeply respectful of my privacy. He offered to look over a few of the business proposals I'd received just as a friendly gesture. His insights were razor-sharp. He saw opportunities I had missed and pitfalls I was about to walk into. After a few weeks of conversation, I took a leap of faith. I agreed to meet him. We met in a discreet corner of a quiet hotel bar. I was a nervous wreck, but the moment he sat down, I knew I had made the right choice. He was unassuming, with kind eyes and a mind that moved at lightning speed. I didn't tell him my real name, but for the first time, I told someone the story of Lyra, the person, not the persona. I didn't tell him about my family. I just said I had personal reasons for my anonymity. He didn't push. He simply nodded and said, "A good story deserves a good storyteller. Your privacy is part of your process. I get it." That day, we formed a partnership. Ben came on as the CEO of Lyra Media. He would handle the business, the deals, the expansion of the brand. I would be the silent, creative force behind it all. It was the perfect symbiosis. Under Ben's guidance, the world of Chronos Eterna grew into a multimedia empire. We had a hit animated series, a line of high-end collectibles, and a movie deal in the works with a legendary director. The money pouring in was staggering, far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. One evening, about 3 years into our partnership, Ben came to my studio with a bottle of wine and a wild look in his eyes. He spread a series of charts and documents across my drafting table. "I have an idea," he said, "and it's either the smartest or craziest thing I've ever thought of." He pointed to our revenue streams. The profits were immense, far more than we needed to simply fund the creative company. "We can just let this sit in a bank," he said, or we can do something with it. We can do something real. His proposal was audacious. He wanted to use the capital from Lyra Media to start a new, independent venture, a boutique investment and development firm, but it wouldn't be a typical firm. Its mission would be to fund and build projects that mirrored the philosophy of Chronos Eterna. We would invest in sustainable energy, cutting-edge technology, and innovative urban design. We would build the future we wrote about. "We can build a better world, Lyra," Ben said, his voice filled with passion. "Not a fantasy one, a real one." The irony was so thick I could taste it. My father built buildings of concrete and steel. I had built a world of paper and ink. Now, I had the chance to use my fantasy to build a real world my father couldn't even dream of. We called it Ethereum Innovations. I agreed to be the silent majority partner. My involvement was the deepest secret of all. The world knew Ben Carter as the brilliant, new money tech mogul behind Ethereum. Only Ben and our lawyers knew that the vast fortune funding the entire operation came from a graphic novelist named Lyra, who was really a woman named Ileana Thompson. For 2 years, Ethereum Innovations became a force to be reckoned with. We operated with speed, vision, and what seemed to the outside world to be an endless supply of capital. Our flagship project, the one that would announce our arrival on the world stage, was the development of a brand new, smart city campus, a sprawling hub for tech and creative companies. It was designed to be a masterpiece of modern architecture and sustainable living. I was living a life I had never thought possible. I was wealthy, respected, at least my persona was, and I was using my success to create things of real, tangible value. I hadn't spoken to my family in 5 years. I never looked them up. The wound they had left was now a faint, silvery scar, a reminder of a past that felt like it belonged to someone else. I was content. I was whole. I thought that chapter was closed forever. The past arrives uninvited. For me, it came not as a phone call or a letter, but as a digital whisper on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my studio, sketching out ideas for a new story arc, when an email from Ben popped up with the subject line, "Bid Proposals, Ethereum Campus Project." It was a routine email. Ethereum was soliciting bids from construction firms to handle the physical build of our flagship smart city campus. It was a massive, career-making contract, and companies from all over the country were vying for it. As the ultimate decision-maker, I had asked Ben to forward me the short list of finalists. I clicked open the attached file, my mind still half in the fictional world of Chronos Eterna. I scrolled through the names of the firms. Most were large, national corporations with sleek, modern branding. And then, near the bottom of the list, I saw it. Thompson and Son Construction. The name hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. I leaned back in my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. It couldn't be, not them. Not here. My first instinct was pure, cold dread. It felt like a violation, like my old world had somehow found a crack in the wall of my new one and was seeping in. I hadn't said the name, Thompson, out loud in years. Seeing it there, in black and white, on a document related to my company, my creation, felt profane. My second instinct was a grim, bitter curiosity. I clicked on their proposal file. It was exactly what I would have expected. The design was dated, the language full of the same self-important bravado my father always used. It spoke of a century of tradition, unwavering quality, and foundations of integrity. It was a document from the past, a relic. Compared to the other slick, forward-thinking proposals, it was almost laughable. Attached was a financial statement. I opened it, my hand trembling slightly. What I saw made my breath catch. The numbers were catastrophic. They were drowning in debt. Their profit margins were razor-thin. A note in the file from Ben's analysts summarized it bluntly. High legacy reputation, but severe cash flow issues. Potentially over-leveraged. This contract is likely a make-or-break scenario for them. Make or break. The words echoed in my mind. The company my great-grandfather had started, the one my father prized above all else, above his own daughter, was on the verge of collapse. And they were coming to me, a faceless entity they saw as their only salvation, for a lifeline. A wave of cold, sharp satisfaction washed over me, so potent it frightened me. It was the vengeful, wounded part of me, the ghost of the girl who cried herself to sleep for years, whispering, "Good. Let it all burn down." I could just tell Ben to reject the bid. It was subpar anyway. He'd cut them from the list, and I would never have to think about them again. They would fail, and my father would lose the one thing he ever truly loved. He would finally know what it felt like to have his world crumble. But as I sat there, the initial rage began to fade, replaced by a more complex and unsettling tangle of emotions. I thought of my mother. I pictured her face, her quiet sadness, her perpetual anxiety. The company's failure wouldn't just be my father's downfall. It would be hers, too. It would destroy their home, their security, everything they had. While she had never defended me, she had never been cruel either. Her sin was one of omission, of weakness, not of malice. Could I condemn her to that fate? And then there was the company itself. It was my last name, too, my great-grandfather's legacy. As much as I hated what it represented, it was part of my history. Seeing it reduced to a desperate, failing balance sheet stirred something uncomfortable in me. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was a sense of profound, tragic waste. I closed my laptop and walked over to the large window of my loft. The city stretched out before me, a glittering tapestry of lights. A city full of buildings. Real, tangible things. For my entire life, my father had worshipped at the altar of the tangible while mocking my world of ideas. And now, my ideas had generated enough tangible power to save or destroy his entire world. The irony was so staggering, it almost made me dizzy. Later that day, Ben called. "Hey, did you get a chance to look at the finalist list?" he asked, his voice businesslike. "I did," I said, my own voice carefully neutral. "That Thompson and Son bid is a bit of a head-scratcher," he said. "Their financials are a mess, and their proposal is straight out of 1995. I'm inclined to cut them immediately and focus on the real contenders." This was my chance. I could just say, "I agree," and it would all be over. The past would be severed for good, but the words wouldn't come. Another idea, a terrifying and audacious one, was taking root in my mind. An idea born not of vengeance or forgiveness, but of a deep, driving need for closure. "Wait," I said, the word coming out before I had even fully formed the thought. "What's up?" Ben asked, sensing the hesitation in my voice. I took a deep breath. "There's something there," I lied, my mind racing to invent a plausible reason. "Their company has deep roots in the city, 100-year history. That kind of legacy, that kind of story. It could be a powerful marketing angle for the campus project, the fusion of old and new." Ben was silent for a moment. "That's a stretch, Lyra," he said, sounding skeptical. "Their bid is weak." "I know," I said, my voice gaining confidence. "But I have a feeling about this. I don't want to award them the contract based on this paper, but I don't want to dismiss them out of hand either. Let's keep them in the running. Bring them in for the final round of presentations. I want to see what they have to say in person. I want them to pitch directly to the board." Of course, there was no board. There was just me. Ben was quiet for a long time. He trusted my instincts. My creative intuition was the bedrock upon which our empire was built. If I had a feeling, he listened. "Okay," he said finally. "If you think there's a play here, we'll play it. I'll have my assistant schedule a final pitch meeting with them for next month. You want to be there for it." "Yes," I said, a cold resolve solidifying in my veins. "I'll be there. I want to look them in the eye myself." When I hung up the phone, I was trembling. The ghost of Ileana Thompson was no longer a faint scar. She was wide awake, and she was about to go home. The month leading up to the meeting was a period of intense and quiet preparation. It felt less like preparing for a business meeting and more like preparing for battle. My decision to face them wasn't simple. It shifted and changed every day, a kaleidoscope of conflicting motives. Some mornings I woke up with a cold desire for revenge, imagining the look on my father's face when he realized who held his fate in her hands. Other days, I felt a deep weariness, a longing to just let it go and not reopen a wound that had taken so long to heal. But underneath it all was a steady, humming current of resolve. This was not just about them. This was about me. For 5 years, I had built a new identity from scratch. Lyra was my shield and my fortress. She was powerful, mysterious, and untouchable. But she was also a fiction. I was still Ileana, and Ileana had unfinished business. She had a story that had been written for her by someone else, a story where she was the final, disappointing chapter. I realized I didn't want revenge. I wanted to write a new ending. I asked Ben to dig deeper into Thompson and Son's situation, under the guise of thorough due diligence. The picture that emerged was bleak. My father, in his arrogance, had taken out massive loans to bid on several large-scale projects, all of which he had lost to more modern, efficient firms. He had refused to update his methods, believing the company's reputation was enough. He was still fighting yesterday's wars. Mark, it seemed, had tried to push for modernization, but Richard had dismissed his ideas as newfangled nonsense. The company was a sinking ship, and the Ethereum contract was the last lifeboat. Reading the reports, I saw my father so clearly, a proud, stubborn man, incapable of admitting he was wrong, willing to steer his family legacy straight into an iceberg rather than change course. And Mark, trapped between his loyalty to his father and the dawning reality of their failure. For a fleeting moment, I felt a sliver of something akin to pity for him. He had gotten everything he was supposed to want, and it was all turning to dust in his hands. My primary focus, however, was on myself. I needed to be ready. I spent hours with Ben, not just going over the Thompson proposal, but dissecting Ethereum's entire campus project. I memorized every detail, from the projected energy efficiency ratings of the solar paneling to the philosophical intent behind the shared green spaces. I needed to know this project, my project, better than anyone. When I faced my father, it wouldn't be as his daughter. It would be as an expert, an authority in a world he didn't understand. My power had to be undeniable. I also thought about my appearance. It seemed superficial, but I knew it was a crucial part of the armor I was building. The Ileana they remembered was a quiet, unassuming girl who wore faded jeans and hid behind her hair. The woman who would walk into that board room needed to be someone else entirely. I went shopping, not for clothes, but for a uniform. I bought a bespoke pantsuit in a deep charcoal gray, tailored to perfection. It was sharp, modern, and utterly professional. I bought minimalist, elegant jewelry and heels that made a soft, confident click on a marble floor. I had my hair, which I had worn long for years, cut into a chic, razor-sharp bob that framed my face. Each external change created an internal shift. Standing in front of the mirror, I saw a stranger looking back, a woman of substance, a woman of power. There was no trace of the heartbroken girl who had fled in the night. The reflection didn't flinch. She looked ready. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my studio, the lights of the city spread out below me, and I allowed myself to feel the fear. I was afraid that the moment I saw my father, all the confidence I had built would crumble. That I would revert to being that 10-year-old girl, holding up her trophy and begging for a crumb of approval. That his voice, his judgment, would have the same devastating power it always had. To fight the fear, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I opened my sketchbook. I didn't draw Anya or any of the fantastic landscapes of Chronos Eterna. I drew a portrait of myself, not the powerful woman in the suit, but the girl I used to be. I drew her with honest, unflinching detail. The uncertainty in her eyes, the way she held herself as if trying to take up less space, the hopeful, vulnerable curve of her smile. I spent hours on it, pouring all the memory and the lingering pain onto the page. When I was finished, I looked at the drawing for a long time. I was finally able to see her not with shame, but with compassion. She hadn't been a disgrace. She had been a survivor. She had done the best she could in a house where the air was too thick to breathe, and she had been brave enough to leave. I carefully tore the page from the sketchbook. I walked over to my desk, picked up the final, bound proposal for the Ethereum campus, a testament to everything I had built, and I slipped the drawing inside the front cover. She was coming with me, not to haunt me, but to remind me of how far I had come. This wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about proving him wrong or making him pay. It was about showing that girl, the one in the drawing, that we had made it. We were free. We were safe. And tomorrow, we were going to take back our story. The headquarters of Ethereum Innovations was a testament to our philosophy. It was a sleek tower of glass and reclaimed wood, a vertical garden climbing its southern face. It didn't loom over the city. It felt like it had grown organically from it. It was a building my father would never have conceived of, let alone been able to build. Walking through the lobby, the soft, confident click of my heels echoing on the polished concrete floor, I felt a sense of ownership that went bone deep. This was my house. They were the ones asking to be let in. Ben met me in the boardroom on the top floor. The room was a masterpiece of minimalist design, dominated by a single, massive table of polished oak. One entire wall was a pane of glass, offering a panoramic, godlike view of the city. My city. "You ready for this?" Ben asked, his expression a mixture of concern and excitement. He knew this was more than just a meeting for me, though he still didn't know the full story. He just knew the Thompson name held a dark significance. "I am," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I took my place at the head of the table, my back to the window. The light streaming in would illuminate them, while I would remain in controlled shadow, a deliberate theatrical choice. My laptop was open, the Thompson proposal on the screen. The drawing of my younger self was tucked safely in my portfolio beside it. We didn't have to wait long. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the boardroom door opened. Ben's assistant showed them in. First came my brother, Mark. He looked older than I remembered, tired. The easy confidence he used to wear like a second skin was gone, replaced by a tense, nervous energy. His suit seemed a size too big for him, as if he had shrunk into it. Then my father walked in. Richard Thompson. He looked exactly the same, yet completely different. His hair was grayer, the lines on his face deeper, but he still carried himself with that same rigid, unbending posture. He radiated an aura of importance, an ingrained habit that even impending financial ruin couldn't break. They strode into the room, their eyes sweeping over the space with a mixture of awe and intimidation. They saw Ben, standing politely by the table, and assumed he was the one in charge. They hadn't seen me yet. I was partially obscured by the high-backed chair. "Mr. Carter," my father began, his voice the familiar, commanding baritone. "Richard Thompson, and this is my son Mark. We appreciate the opportunity to be here." He extended a hand toward Ben. Ben, playing his part perfectly, simply smiled and gestured towards me. "Thank you for coming, gentlemen, but you should be addressing our majority partner. She's the one who makes the final decisions." As if on cue, I swiveled my chair to face them fully. Time seemed to slow down. I watched as their eyes fell on me. For a split second, there was nothing. Just polite, professional blankness as they registered the woman at the head of the table. Then I saw the flicker. First in Mark's eyes, a twitch of confusion, a furrowing of the brow as his brain tried to connect the face he was seeing with a memory it had buried long ago. Then he recognized me. His jaw went slack. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly white. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. My father's reaction was slower and more profound. His gaze followed Mark's, and then his eyes locked on mine. The practiced, corporate smile froze on his face. It didn't fall. It seemed to shatter, the pieces remaining in a grotesque mask of disbelief. His entire body went rigid. The hand he had extended to Ben fell limply to his side. "Ileana," he whispered. The name was a puff of air, a sound stripped of all its former power. I offered them a small, cool smile. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs, but on the surface, I was a sea of calm. I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my head, but I had always imagined a dramatic confrontation. The reality was quieter and far more devastating. Their silent, utter shock was more satisfying than any words I could have spoken. "Hello, Father, Mark," I said, my voice even and controlled. I let the names hang in the air for a beat, enjoying the way they flinched. "It's been a long time." I gestured to the two empty chairs across the vast table from me. "Please, have a seat. We have your proposal in front of us." They moved like automatons, their eyes never leaving my face. They were searching for the girl they knew, the quiet, defeated daughter, the disappointing little sister. They couldn't find her. She wasn't there. In her place was this woman, this stranger, sitting in a seat of unimaginable power, looking at them with the cool, appraising gaze of a queen examining her supplicants. They sat. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the building's climate control. Mark fumbled with his briefcase, his hands shaking so badly he could barely work the latch. My father simply stared at me, his face a canvas of warring emotions: confusion, shock, and a dawning, horrifying flicker of fear. I let the silence stretch, letting them stew in their disbelief. I wanted them to fully absorb the impossible reality of the situation. The daughter he had named a disgrace was about to sit in judgment of his life's work. The pathetic fantasy she had chased had led her to this throne, while the real world he worshipped had brought him to his knees before her. Finally, when the tension was so thick it was almost hard to breathe, I leaned forward slightly, folded my hands on the polished surface of the table, and fixed them with a calm, unwavering gaze. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice now devoid of any personal warmth, purely business. "I'm Ileana Thompson, majority partner at Ethereum Innovations. Please begin when you're ready." My father and brother didn't so much give a presentation as they did stumble through a waking nightmare. Mark was supposed to lead, but he could barely make eye contact with me. He fumbled with his laptop, his slides appearing out of order. His voice, when he found it, was a thin, reedy thing, a pale imitation of the confident heir apparent I remembered. He kept glancing at our father for support, but Richard was useless. He sat ramrod straight in his chair, his knuckles white where he gripped its arms, his gaze fixed on me. He looked like a man who had just watched the laws of physics invert before his very eyes. Their pitch was just as I'd expected, a tired recitation of their company's history, filled with buzzwords like integrity and tradition. It was a desperate appeal to a past that no longer held any currency. They were trying to sell a horse and buggy to a company that designed starships. I let them finish. When Mark's voice finally trailed off into a defeated silence, I didn't immediately speak. I took a slow sip of water, allowing the weight of their failure to settle in the room. Then I began. "Thank you, gentlemen," I said, my tone crisp and clinical. "I've reviewed your proposal in depth." I swiveled my laptop screen so they could see it, and frankly, it's inadequate. I proceeded to calmly, methodically, and ruthlessly deconstruct their entire business model. I used the very principles my father had always mocked: innovation, adaptability, creative problem-solving. "Your proposed construction methods are outdated and inefficient, leading to a 20% cost overrun compared to our other bids," I stated, pointing to a chart. "Your energy plan is non-compliant with the environmental standards of this project. You speak of tradition, but you show no vision for the future. This campus is about forward momentum. Your company, Mr. Thompson," I said, looking directly at my father, "is standing still, at best." Mark wilted under the assault, looking down at the table. But my father's shock was finally beginning to curdle into his old, familiar anger. "What is this?" he finally exploded, slamming his hand on the table. "Some kind of sick joke? You disappear for 5 years, and now you show up here to lecture me." "I'm not lecturing you, Father," I replied, my voice dangerously soft. "I'm giving you a professional assessment of your failing business. This is the part of the real world you always said I knew nothing about: balance sheets, profit margins, viability, or the lack thereof." "You did this deliberately," he accused, his face turning a blotchy red. "You set this whole thing up to humiliate me." I leaned back in my chair, a flicker of genuine emotion finally showing in my eyes. Humiliate you? I asked, a bitter laugh almost escaping my lips. You want to talk about humiliation? Do you remember Mark's promotion party? Do you remember standing in front of 50 people and calling your own daughter a disgrace? A pathetic fantasy? Do you have any idea what that felt like? The room went silent. Mark flinched as if I'd struck him. My father's righteous anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of remembered shame. I left that night with nothing but the clothes on my back and that word, disgrace, ringing in my ears. I continued, my voice low and intense. And you know what? In a way, you were right. I was a disgrace to your world. I didn't fit. I didn't want your concrete and your steel, so I left. And I built my own world, a world you called a fantasy. I gestured around the magnificent boardroom at the city skyline behind me. This company, Ethereum, was built on the back of that fantasy. Every award Lyra won, every book she sold, every deal she made, it all led here, to this room, to this table, to this moment. I leaned forward again, my eyes locking with his. So, let me ask you, Father, is this tangible enough for you? Is this success real enough for you? The fate of Thompson and Son, your entire legacy, is in the hands of the pathetic fantasy you threw away. Tears were streaming down my father's face now. They weren't tears of sadness, but tears of a pride so thoroughly broken that it had no other way to express itself. He looked old, and for the first time in my life, he looked small. "What do you want, Ileana?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "To destroy us, is that it?" This was the moment for revenge or for grace. I took a deep breath. "No," I said softly. "Destroying you would be a waste of a perfectly good asset." I pushed a folder across the table. "This is my offer. Ethereum Innovations will acquire a 51% majority stake in Thompson and Son Construction. We will absorb your debt and inject the necessary capital to modernize. The Thompson name will remain, but it will become a subsidiary of Ethereum." Mark opened the folder, his eyes widening as he read the terms. "Mark," I continued, "you can stay on as president of the subsidiary, but you will report to a new board of directors, appointed by me. You will implement the changes we mandate without question." I looked at my father. "As for you, you will be given the honorary title of founder consultant. You will receive a generous pension, but your operational authority will be zero. You will step down, effective immediately." It was a total surrender, a rescue, but also a complete and utter takeover. He would keep his name, but he would lose his kingdom. My father stared at the documents, then back at me, his face a ruin. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say. I had won, not by being louder, but by being better. He slowly, shakily nodded his head. The aftermath was quiet. The lawyers handled the details. A few days later, I received a call from my mother. It was the first time I had heard her voice in 5 years. She was crying. "He told me everything, Ileana," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I was weak. I should have stood up for you. I was so afraid of him, but I should have been more afraid of losing you. Can you ever forgive me?" "We can talk about that, Mom," I said, a part of my heart unclenching for the first time. "We can start to talk." That weekend, I went to their house. Not the ghost, not the queen, just Ileana. My father was in his study, surrounded by the ghosts of his own legacy. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "The company your great-grandfather started," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Is safe," I finished for him. "It will be different, but it will survive. It will. Build the future now." He nodded, swallowing hard. "The things I said to you, they were cruel, unforgivable. I was so afraid that your world would make my world obsolete, and I was right." He looked at me, and for the first time, I think he truly saw me. "You are not a disgrace, Ileana. You are formidable." It wasn't the perfect, tearful apology movies are made of. But coming from him, the word formidable was more valuable than "I love you." It was an admission, a validation. It was enough. Our relationship would never be simple, but it was no longer a war. It was the beginning of a tentative, fragile peace, one built not on obligation or history, but on a new, hard-won respect. I walked out of his study, leaving him with his past, and stepped back into my future. I had returned to the place of my deepest wound, not to reopen it, but to finally, completely heal it. I hadn't just saved my family's company. I had saved myself. I had rewritten my own story, and this time I had given it the ending it deserved.